When Ida Nickel enters the kitchen that morning, her mother is shocked to the core.
Can't you hear me?
My head is really bad. Just fear.
Everything begins when Ida Nickel is 16. For several years, she has been plagued by occasional muscle and joint pains. But today, this stabbing pain in her neck is so severe that she even briefly loses consciousness.
Ida, I definitely felt suddenly worse. I couldn't walk anymore. I had such muscular problems that I even went to the emergency room because something was wrong with my cervical vertebra and I couldn't breathe properly anymore. It was then noted that several vertebrae were blocked and not in the position they should be.
Everyone gets a painkiller and the next day goes. Mother Inky goes with her to the general practitioner.
I would like to ask you to briefly sit on the couch.
Sandu Doinert wants to take another closer look at the neck, but apart from severe tension, he cannot find anything.
Those were indeed pains in the musculoskeletal area, particularly concerning the spine, but also regarding the neck-shoulder area, really very non-specific, sometimes conveyed with a lot of emotion.
Ida is supposed to go to physiotherapy, but it doesn't help her at all. Her whole body hurts, and she now needs pain medication daily just to make it through. But that's not all. New is this eerie weakness.
At some point, she was just lying still in bed. She had pain. She was so tired, and I was really worried.
But then the muscle and joint pain suddenly disappear again, and Ida's energy returns. The relief is immense, but only shortly.
It really is that in nice weather we played outside or played football, and the next day she was laid up.
The next 2 years continue like this, a constant up and down. Ida's pains are not quite as severe as in the beginning, but they come and go in unpredictable bouts. Eerie. Ida tries to somehow come to terms with it. But then, 2 weeks before the final exams, a flare-up hits her that completely throws her off course.
Ida, everything okay?
My arm, my head. Can you hear me? My head. So this arm went numb, and the headache was so hellish that I sat there. My eyes were blurry. I couldn't see properly, and I had real difficulty expressing myself through the diffuse pain.
Immediately, the two rush to the general practitioner, and he immediately has a serious suspicion: stroke. After a few neurological tests, Sandu Doiner is fortunately sure that it is not that. He assumes that it is more likely an orthopedic problem, perhaps a slipped cervical vertebra, and refers her to an orthopedist. There, Ida goes into the MRI, but the images don't show a displaced vertebra, nothing that could explain the symptoms.
And then the doctor comes and says, no, they are actually healthy.
Her parents cannot believe it. Because if Ida is healthy, why can she barely stand on her own anymore? She now needs her grandfather's old wheelchair, and it's not just because of the pain. It's as if her muscles no longer obey her.
We moved my husband out. He was allowed to sleep in her room, and she lay next to me because I really took care of her. She could barely walk. I went to the toilet with her, I showered her, brushed her teeth and combed her hair.
Yes, I have been questioning that for a long
Even though
time.
this severe episode slowly subsides after a few weeks, Ida first needs a break. She withdraws from school. The 18-year-old simply can't continue.
See you soon. Bye.
One is afraid that you'll wake up in the morning and can't walk anymore. And you are glad every day that you well, and that you can still walk and that I could shower alone, that I could do my hair by myself.
Sandu Doinert cannot rest with Ida's case. Where do the eerie pain surges come from? Maybe it is rheumatism. After all, there are over 300 forms, and some also trigger pain attacks. That is why he is now sending Ida to the rheumatology clinic in Bad Bramstedt. It's worth a try.
Yes, Professor Kötter, it's me.
There, she will be thoroughly examined for a week, and this time the rheumatologists narrow down their suspicion to fibromyalgia, a complex pain disorder that fits the symptoms very well.
These are pains, credible pains, but not directly in the joints, rather around the joints. And they usually occur during certain activities, mainly isometric holding tasks. When you hold the steering wheel in the car, for example, it gets worse. Yes, that's quite typical.
I was totally happy at that moment because I thought, okay, you can work with this. It has a name.
There are no medications for fibromyalgia. The most important treatment is physiotherapy.
Please sit down carefully.
But when Ida tells her therapist what diagnosis is on the table, she is skeptical.
The diagnosis is now fibromyalgia.
Enough patients with rheumatism and fibromyalgia come to us for therapy. You can do quite a bit for them, you can really help them. But with Ida, I never felt from the beginning that it was going in that direction. With Ida, I always had a sense, a suspicion that it was something neurological, something nerve-related.
It's stranger than usual. And one day I was sitting with her and had this numb arm again and these neurological failures. That means my verbal memory, in other words, I had a very hard time expressing myself. Everything was very blurry. And I thought, Ida, this isn't working. Maybe you have something neurological that needs to be clarified.
The family doctor sends Ida for another MRI. Her head is the only thing that hasn't been examined yet. 2 days later, the doctor reports the results. There are white spots visible in the images.
He says, we found something in your brain that doesn't belong there. It looks like areas of inflammation towards MS. You need to go to the hospital. That was very shocking for me. I still remember breaking down on the phone, crying.
Really bad. Just fear.
MS, multiple sclerosis, an incurable and progressive disease where misguided immune system cells attack the nerve cells in the brain. Ida goes to the clinic in Neumünster, under the care of neurologist Klaas Focke-Wehrmann. And he also initially considers MS to be very likely.
Hello. The nurse will show you the room. Yes, exactly. The distribution pattern was such that for the patient, one lesion was in an area where it would also typically be associated with MS.
The neurologist takes a sample of cerebrospinal fluid and has it tested for typical signs of inflammation. Negative. However, that doesn't mean it's not multiple sclerosis. The doctor wants to closely monitor the progress. Ida now has to regularly go for checkups at the MRI.
So every time I had diffuse pain again, suddenly, be it a numb arm, tingling, sensory disturbances. So when my symptoms got worse, I was sent directly to the MRI, and it has stayed that way. The white spots remained where they were, and fortunately nothing increased.
And that means the white spots are not MS symptoms. Inflammatory foci, but completely harmless. This takes the suspicion of multiple sclerosis off the table. Without a diagnosis, Ida is discharged. For more than 2 years, she has been fighting against her mysterious illness, which apparently no one can diagnose.
You take 3 steps forward and 4 back. And each time you fall completely back to zero. 2001. That was very exhausting, even though I already had so little
But
strength.
the 18-year-old doesn't give up. To better cope with her pain, she begins an inpatient pain therapy at the Bad Bramstedt clinic. And suddenly, the situation turns around. Hello, Mum. Her mother just saw a report on television that Ida absolutely must watch.
All good? Yes, well, I did notice a few parallels and found it highly interesting and sent it to Ida. I said, take a look at this. Look, what do you say about that? And that's when I saw myself again for the first time.
Excitedly, she shows her pain therapist Markus Stöcker the video. It's about a woman whose joints are overly flexible due to connective tissue weakness and who therefore suffers from severe pain. The doctor immediately remembers Ida's first examination with him, because it was noticed that Ida's joints are also extremely flexible and her skin and connective tissue are remarkably elastic.
I can hyperextend my elbow completely like this. I can move my thumbs to here. I used to be able to do the splits, but not anymore.
Normally, connective tissue is a firm and robust network that surrounds muscles, joints, and organs. In the case of connective tissue weakness, the fibers are too soft, like they are overstretched. This is usually harmless, but in rare cases it can have consequences, for example, in joints like the cervical vertebrae. They can easily shift, are overflexible, hypermobile.
So it's the instability of the joints that makes a problem as a protective reaction with muscle tension and pain symptoms. That's how you can imagine it. That could fit. However, the diagnosis from the television report is extremely rare. Markus Stöcker first needs to read up on how this disease can even be detected. Ida's last suspicion gives her no rest. In every free minute, she now researches experts on the internet herself. But it's not easy because there are hardly any specialists. Fortunately, she finally finds one.
Yes, she is in Cologne. Yes. So I said, Mom, we have to go to Cologne. I want clarity. I want to talk to someone who is really specialized.
1 week later, the two are sitting with geneticist Helena Young. She is familiar with the necessary diagnostics. The expert examines Ida's hypermobile joints and compares her findings with an international set of criteria. Okay. She also creates a family tree.
It turned out that both the mother and the maternal grandmother also show signs of hypermobility.
My mother always said back then that we all have weak connective tissue. My grandma had it really extremely, but for me it was never in a way that it was a medical condition. I could bend my hands and my knees were naturally a little overflexible, but I never had pain.
It's different with Ida. The geneticist is now sure of what's missing, due to something not yet detectable. Due to a genetic defect, Ida's connective tissue around the joints is incorrectly formed. It is much too loose. The joints are pathologically hypermobile and press on the nerves with every movement. When the muscles register this, they tense automatically to prevent greater damage, hence the constant pain. And IDA's neurological issues can now be explained. The cervical vertebrae repeatedly press on important nerves.
Many patients describe these symptoms as brain fog, memory lapses, speech disorders, dizziness, fainting spells.
Everything fits together, and thus the diagnosis is made. Ida Nichols suffers from a rare connective tissue disorder that leads to hypermobility of her joints. The hypermobile form of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, EDS. Mother and daughter can hardly believe it. Hardly believe it.
It was such a relief for me to see my daughter like that and to know that's her diagnosis now, and she can live with it.
We hugged each other afterwards. We cried a little, went to a cafe and reminisced about the past few years.
The Ehlers-Danlos syndrome cannot be cured, but specialized physiotherapy and gentle methods to strengthen the deep muscles help Ida. Today, she can manage her energy well and has her pain under control. In the meantime, she has even completed a training program.